want to tell you, this church today, if it had not been for Barry and Mel, this church would not be in existence. It would not be here. My wife, Chanel, was pregnant with our daughter, Matisse, 7 months from now. You know, God has a sense of humor. I look back and I think, God, why did you do it like that? I mean, I always considered myself a gentleman. And I thought, I look back on it now, and I think, how in the world did I put Chanel through that? And how did I put Barry and Melanie through that? But I had a battle getting the opportunity to start this church. Every time I pray and get a hold of God, I just break down weeping, and God will say, start a church in South Augusta, because we needed one in South Augusta. We didn't have one. Had one church, as far as I knew, in Augusta. And I couldn't get permission. Finally, one day, we pulled up to the house of the D.O., who, by the way, we later became fast friends. And I taught him how to golf, so he doesn't know how to golf, because I taught him. We pulled up in front of his house, and I looked at Barry, and I said, Barry, this is the last shot. If he says no, I'm finished. So we went in the house, and when we opened the door, he said, come in, come in. And he looked at me, and he said, you ready to start that church? Man, it was like I was in heaven. Like I was in heaven. Barry and Melanie took us into their home. We had no place to live. Had no money. Nothing. Took us into their home. We lived there for 7 weeks. We took Chanel from their house to the hospital for Letitia to be born. What days those were. But we were so happy. Chanel never had one complaint, never one time. While she was in the hospital, in the meantime, we finally got a place to start the church. Now, we organized the church at the, what do we call that, center? A little place on Lumpkin Road. Community center. It's a little community center. That's where we met the first couple of times. It's the only place Barry could find. And so we met there and organized there with 10 adults and 1 child. And how many of you are here today that were charter members? Would y'all stand, all of you here? If y'all don't mind standing. I'm so emotional you wouldn't want to hear me preach today, because I like to made up scriptures and everything else. I don't think God would appreciate it. But while Chanel was in the hospital giving birth, Barry had located a church for sale up on Young Drive. He'd been Presbyterian. And so anyway, we ended up getting that. I went to our state headquarters in Atlanta, and I told them what I wanted to do. I cast my vision to the overseer of the state council, we call it, what I wanted to do. And they talked about it and sent me out of the room and called me back in. And finally, because that building and the Parsons next door was $21,000. So maybe can you buy a good car for that? And so they came out finally, called me in and said, listen, Robert, we're going to invest in you more money than we have ever invested in a person. And I said, well, $4,000. We're going to let you have. And that's big money back then. So we paid $3,000 down to get the building. Took $1,000, and the men got in there and fixed up the parsonage, painted it out next door because it had been a Sunday school annex. Had that all prepared. So we owed $18,000 on everything. And We brought Chanel home and the baby. Dr. Watson, some of you old timers might remember him. They called him Colonel Watson. He didn't have a hair on his head. About 2 days after we got home, we didn't even have a chair for him to sit in. We had a bed. And he came and he sat down, or sat on the edge of the bed and talked to us. And he said, "What will y'all do with it?" And we told him we organized a church. He said, "Listen," he was a good Baptist brother. And he said, "I want to tell you that here's what's going to happen." He said, "I remember when I started my practice. I remember my very first patient. Then I had 6 patients, and then I had a dozen patients, and then I had 100 patients." He said, "I have no idea how many patients I have now." He said, "I had so many doctors on staff." He taught at the medical college. But he said, "That's what's going to happen here." A word of prophecy. God bless. The Presbyterians helped us. Got a dinette set for $5 from them. Got a stove for $30. I think Barry bought a washing machine for us. And we set up housekeeping. Now, folks, here's the miracle. I said, "God, I'm not too good to get a job. But I have given my life to preaching the gospel. And I don't want to get a job. I want to give full time to building this church." Folks, I go back now. Every once in a while, I get up my little check register. I still got it. And I look it up. At the end of some months, we had $2.32 in our bank account. Some months, we jumped up to $3.56 in our bank account. But let me tell you this, we never laughed at anything. Never laughed at anything. I got 80% of the tithes, sent the rest off to headquarters. Was very faithful in doing that. And they said, "Robert, why don't you take the Sunday night offering?" I said, "Okay, I'll take the Sunday night offering." Did it for 3 or 4 weeks, and the Lord spoke to me and said, "Don't take that offering." So I said, "Okay." So I told the church, I said, "I'm not taking that offering." In 1 year's time, I called my council together and I said, "Cut my salary." I'm probably the only preacher in the Church of God that's ever done that. More than likely. I said, "Cut my salary." They said, "What are you talking about? We're supposed to go all the way back from when the church started and pay you a full salary once the church is able." I said, "I don't want it." I said, "Give me $125 a week. That's more money than I've ever made in my life." God is my witness. When that happened, God just poured stuff out. It was unbelievable. The tithes shot up. I remember those days. You know, there are times it was nothing for us to have 12, 15 people accept Christ on Sunday mornings. That was normal. That was regular. It happened. There was such an influx of souls. I look back at Vera, where are you? Vera, back there. Hey, back in those days, you and Frank probably weren't the best people in Augusta. You're all right. I'll never forget it. When Frank got saved, and I had a council meeting, and Frank came to the council meeting. He really did. He came in there, and he said to us, "I need your help." He said, "You name it, I've done it." And he started enumerating the sins that he'd been involved in. And I look back at this beautiful family now, and I thank God. I'm telling you, this church, God's not finished with you. Steve, you and Sharon, I am excited. I love the name. I love that new name. When I say this, you know, I've always been right up front. I wouldn't give you the snap of my finger for the old name. first name, the old, whatever it was. I mean, what are you going to do to me? I'm too old for you to do anything. So God bless the church. Wasn't long. I was hoping Jimmy Smith would make it, but I think it's been a death in his family. I heard. I think this is his grandson. I think his grandson died suddenly from a heart attack, 47 years old. So, but I'll never forget when Jimmy Smith came to us, and I needed a superintendent. We needed a superintendent for the children's department of the church. Y'all remember that basement over there, anybody? Mm-hmm. And Jimmy said, I'll take that. I had never seen anything like it. It wasn't long, that thing was packed out. Chanel, my wife, worked in the nursery. Leticia was about 2 years old at that time. And one day she was teaching the class, and she was talking about God made the stars, God made the trees, God made the flowers. Leticia, she said, what is it, honey? And she said, no. She said, Daddy did that. I never told Leticia different. But it wasn't long before that thing was packed out with little kids. If you remember, it was packed out. Jimmy Smith would have people up at his shop, his workers up there, and he would clean out one of those bays at his shop, and he'd put his cooker up and cook steaks for them, and have them up there, and never charged us a penny for it. I remember one night, a little boy, I think he was picked up on the bus, and he was sick in the hospital. And Jimmy had to work late that night, and he wanted to visit the kid. And he couldn't figure out how to do it because in those days, at a certain time, they would let visitors in. So what he did, he took his stethoscope that he used to listen to motors in his shop, and he put his coat and tie on, and he walked, put that thing around his neck, and walked right into the hospital. Like he was a doctor. Went up and visited the kid and prayed for him. That kind of commitment, and down through the years, that's the kind of commitment this church was built on, right here. So the past, the scripture I want to use was Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's past, present, and future. And I thought, well, I'll just call my little, what I'm going to say is then, now, and next. Calling, the first sermon I ever preached in this church, over in that center, I read the scripture about God speaking to Abraham and said, I want you to get out and go. And Abraham said, where am I going? And God said, well, I'm not going to tell you. I just want you to go. You got to trust me. If you really want to know the fullness of God, I want to tell you how to do it. There's a calling that God has. God calls people. And when there's a calling, it has to be followed by obedience. Can I just take the time to relate this to you? I'll never forget the night God called me into the ministry. Now, when you get married, you start reminiscing a lot, right? Some of you old timers. My church has heard this over and over. By the way, I just want to tell you, somebody said, are you retired? I said, retired? I'm only 78. My church won't let me retire. Every time I meet with my board and talk about it, no, you can't do that. And God's given us a wonderful church with great people. But I remember the call of God when I was a teenager in Jessup, Georgia. We were in a revival. And some of you hold on to your seat, some of you new people at Pentecost. Because God got a hold of my heart. I was a senior in high school. I wanted to be a medical doctor and so on and so forth. We were in a revival. I was sitting up close from a teenager. 180 pounds of muscle. I know you don't believe it. But there's still 180 pounds of muscle. It's still in here somewhere. And she preached that night. It was a lady evangelist, and the Holy Spirit began to move. And God spoke to me. Told me to do something stupid. He said, get down on your knees and crawl around the inside this church. And I said, Lord, I'm not doing that. Has anybody ever been desperate for God? I can show you some things in the Bible that doesn't make one bit of sense. And I sat there and I said, God, I'm not doing that. This is Robert Herring, 108. That's what I told him. I'm 180 pounds of muscle. I sing songs. I'm not going to do that. He spoke to me again and said, get in the car. I did it. I got to the point I said, God, I don't care. I'm desperate for you. And I started crawling. I got around the back of the church and started back down the other aisle and got about halfway. About where I fell and messed up my back. Building this church. God spoke to me and said, preach my word and pray for the sick. Now, all of that calling and obedience has brought me right back here today. And I want to say to any of you, God can do anything with anybody if they'll let him. I am the most unlikely person in the world that anybody would ever have thought would preach the gospel. Next March will be 60 years. I got through this thing when I looked over the mirror. I'll never forget that Monday evening. Came up here to work. Because you got to understand, when we built this church, we borrowed $100,000 and built the church and the parsonage. Isn't that wonderful? But I was out here working on a Monday evening. It was time to knock off because I was still pastoring the church. I'd work, I'd go home, take a shower, shave, change clothes, go to the hospital or whatever. And I was over there, and I told the brick mason, I said, I'm leaving. And when I turned on the scaffold, there was a loose board, and it flipped me over. And I fell 18 feet, right over there with nothing to stop me. And fell 18 feet on concrete. God, I tell you, he's got a sense of humor. If I had fallen any other way, it would have killed me. But I fell on the most padded part of my body. Right on my bottom. And I laid back. And the first thing I did was move my feet. And that guy came over and said, preacher, don't move. I said, don't worry. I laid there. Gary's office was right up the street here, his insurance agency. Somebody called him. He came running down here. They called the ambulance. They came and got me, took me to the hospital. I was in such excruciating pain. The x-rayed me. The doctor said, we don't have an empty bed in the hospital. I don't see anything broken. You're so swollen back there. And I don't see anything broken. He said, that's Monday. He said, if you go home, stay in the bed. I mean, don't get out of the bed until Friday and come back. I said, okay, all right. There's some humor there I can tell you, but I'm not going to take the time. So anyway, I went home. Brother W.G. Hammond was the district overseer, and he came and anyway, he helped me because my wife was having a Tupperware party or something. So I lay there, and then Friday I went back and he gave me another x-ray. He said, oh my goodness. He said, if I don't know this, you'll never go home. He chipped 3 vertebrae in my back. And hey, we had a blast. You know what a donut is? You ever had to sit on one of those? That's the way I would go into church and sit on that donut, but it looked like an inner tube. It's a joke there. Now get up and preach. And I asked the doctor, I said, Doc, how long am I going to hurt? He said, how long do you expect to live? It's true. I said, you mean all of my life? He said, yes. When I left this church, I don't think I ever had the chance to give the testimony. When I left this church, I still had back problems. Moved to Atlanta. I lost my mind and moved to Atlanta. That's another story. Moved to Atlanta, took a state youth job. One day I was riding down the road with my wife.